Now is Chris Vascotto, Executive Director, Nova Scotia Seafood Alliance.
On the peninsula are getting more food and grocery options.
Let me paint you a picture. It's a Tuesday evening, you're at the grocery store, you're tired, you've got maybe 30 minutes to figure out dinner. You walk past the seafood counter, and there it is, a row of beautiful pink salmon fillets sitting on a bed of ice, glistening under the store lights. The label says fresh Atlantic salmon. The price is reasonable. You put it in the cart. Done. That's dinner. Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. Under Canadian Food Inspection Agency rules, any fish that has been previously frozen and then thawed for display must be labeled as previously frozen. But walk into any major grocery chain right now and see how prominently that information is displayed. That's salmon sitting on ice. According to industry insiders and food researchers, a significant portion of fish sold as fresh at major Canadian grocery chains was frozen at some point earlier in the supply chain, then thawed for display because consumers perceive unfrozen fish as higher quality. That practice is legal as long as it's clearly labeled previously frozen. In many cases, there's nothing technically wrong with that, but it means what looks like fresh may be something quite different from what you're imagining. And that's just the beginning, because according to the most comprehensive seafood fraud investigation ever conducted in Canada, nearly half of all seafood samples tested in restaurants and grocery stores across multiple Canadian cities were found to be mislabeled. Not slightly off, mislabeled, wrong species, cheaper fish sold as expensive ones. And in some documented cases, fish that has been banned in countries like Japan and Italy quietly turning up on plates under a completely different name. And then there's the layer most people never even think about. The fishermen and workers somewhere in the global supply chain who caught or processed that fish. Were they paid? Were they treated fairly? According to a damning investigation published by the Outlaw Ocean Project, major Canadian retailers have been found sourcing from processing plants where forced labor practices, including the use of North Korean laborers and Uyghur workers in Chinese seafood factories, have been documented. The investigation built a supply chain database that traced seafood from those facilities to the shelves of grocery chains Canadians shop at every single week. In this video, we are going store by store through 5 major Canadian grocery chains, using publicly available reports, independent investigations, and documented evidence to show you exactly what the watchdogs have found. By the end, you will know which stores made this list and why, what the real risks are for the fish you bring home, and the practical steps you can take right now to protect yourself and your family. This is not a scare piece. This is information the industry has not gone out of its way to make easy to find, and you deserve to have it. Let's start the countdown. Number 5, Costco Canada. Costco might be the last store you'd expect to see on a list like this, and honestly, that reaction is fair. Costco has a genuinely better track record than most when it comes to seafood transparency. Their Kirkland Signature private label falls under their sustainability policy. They're one of only 2 major Canadian retailers, along with Metro, that has consistently labeled farmed salmon as farmed. That matters. So why are they on this list? Because even doing better than the competition is not the same as doing enough. And the 2025 SeaChoice Seafood Progress Report, the most detailed assessment of Canadian grocery retailers' seafood accountability in existence, still gave Costco a failing grade. And the reasons behind that failing grade reveal a structural problem that affects every Canadian who shops there. Here's the core issue. Costco carries a significant volume of national third-party seafood brands. Walk through any Costco and you'll see Highliner, Aquastar, Cloverleaf, and others occupying significant freezer real estate alongside Kirkland's signature products. According to SeaChoice's findings, those third-party brands are not held to the same sourcing standards as Kirkland products. The company profits from every sale, but the oversight that Costco applies to its own label simply does not extend to the other brands sharing its shelves. SeaChoice describes this as a responsibility gap. And it's a gap that every major Canadian retailer has in common. Now add the human rights dimension. According to SeaChoice's analysis, none of the major Canadian retailers, including Costco, are incorporating worker perspectives into their sourcing decisions. What that means practically is that the third-party social audits that retailers rely on to verify ethical sourcing have been found by independent investigators to be consistently failing to detect labor abuse. The Outlaw Ocean Project, a nonprofit investigative journalism organization, found that Chinese seafood processing plants were passing routine audits while employing forced labor. Independent auditors were scheduled in advance, workers were afraid to speak, and the seafood kept moving. According to the Outlaw Ocean's supply chain tracing database, major Canadian grocery chains were among the buyers of seafood traced back to facilities linked to these practices. Costco appears in that picture. In earlier C-Choice assessments, Costco, along with several other major Canadian retailers, was criticized specifically for applying sustainability certifications, particularly for farmed salmon, that independent experts described as not fit for purpose. Labels that said responsibly farmed or best practice from open-net pen salmon farms, when the scientific and environmental community had significant reservations about those certifications' rigor. Costco earns the number 5 position because they are genuinely trying harder than most. But in a system this broken, trying harder than most still means there are serious, documented gaps between what the label implies and what is actually being verified. Next, number 4, Sobeys. If Loblaw is Canada's largest grocery retailer, Sobeys is arguably its closest national rival. The Sobeys network spans more than 1,500 stores under banners you know well. Sobeys itself, Safeway, IGA, Foodland, Freshco, private label products under the Compliments brand. A business that has been operating in Canada for over 115 years. And in the 2025 C-Choice assessment, a failing grade. The specific problem that C-Choice identified with Sobeys is not simply a banner coverage gap. According to C-Choice's snapshot, the sustainable seafood commitment does apply across Sobeys store banners. The more significant critique is what that commitment doesn't cover. Third-party branded seafood sold within those stores. The frozen seafood aisle at any Sobeys banner carries national brands that operate under their own supply chains entirely outside Sobeys' sourcing oversight. The company profits from every sale, but the accountability framework it promotes publicly doesn't follow the product all the way to your cart. This is the kind of detail that companies quietly hope consumers won't examine too closely. And most don't. Like every retailer on this list, Sobeys also has a third-party brand problem. The frozen seafood aisle at Sobeys stores carries national brands, Highliner, Cloverleaf, Oceans, that are not under Sobeys' supply chain oversight. These brands are sourced, processed, and sold by their own companies, and Sobeys collects a margin on every package. But according to C-Choice, Sobeys is not investigating those brands' supply chains for human rights risks. You are, in a real sense, trusting a company that Sobeys itself has not verified. Here's a data point that stood out to us. In previous C-Choice assessments, Sobeys was specifically noted for not reporting on what percentage of the seafood it actually sells meets its own sustainability targets. That kind of reporting silence is significant because when a retailer has strong numbers, they typically want to share them. When a retailer goes quiet on data, it's worth asking why. And then there is the Outlaw Ocean connection. The C-Choice 2025 report specifically cited the Outlaw Ocean Project's sprawling investigation into human rights abuses in the Chinese seafood industry. A supply chain tracing database built during that investigation identified several major Canadian retailers whose supply chains connect to processing facilities with documented forced labor practices. Sobeys is among those named. To put the human story behind this in perspective, according to the Outlaw Ocean Project's reporting, some workers in Chinese seafood processing facilities linked to these supply chains are North Korean laborers, a situation that represents a violation of United Nations sanctions. Others are Uyghur workers transferred under China's forced labor transfer program. These are not vague allegations, they are findings from a multi-year investigation that involved on-the-ground investigators, satellite data analysis, trade records, and worker interviews published in partnership with major international media outlets, including The New Yorker. None of that is Sobeys' fault in isolation. The entire system that allows this to happen is the problem. But the question C-Choice is asking, and the question we are asking, is what is Sobeys doing about it? And the honest answer, based on the documented evidence available, is not enough. We're at the halfway point, and what we've covered so far is just the foundation. The next 3 stores on this list involve a set of revelations that go well beyond policy grades. Now number 3, Walmart Canada. Over 400 stores across the country. More than 280 supercenters with full grocery departments. Walmart is not just a major Canadian retailer, it is the world's largest retailer by revenue, which gives it a purchasing power with global suppliers that almost no other company on earth can match. That leverage, in theory, could be used to drive meaningful change in seafood supply chains. And yet, the 2025 C-Choice assessment gave Walmart Canada a failing grade. Let's start with the supply chain labeling issue, because this one genuinely affects every Canadian who buys fish, not just at Walmart, but across the industry. And most people have never heard of it. Here's how seafood labeling works in Canada right now. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency requires that seafood be labeled according to where it was processed, not where it was caught. Not where the fish actually came from. Where the last substantial transformation occurred. What that means in practice is this. Fish caught in Canadian waters, shipped overseas to China for processing, then returned to Canada can legally sit on a Canadian grocery shelf with a product of China label, even though it came from Canadian oceans and Canadian fishermen. Or a fish caught off Newfoundland, shipped to China to be gutted, then to the United States to be breaded and packaged, can legally show up in a Canadian store labeled as an American product. That is not a loophole. That is how the system currently works. This is not unique to Walmart. It applies industry-wide. But Walmart's enormous volume of imported seafood means the gap between what the label implies and what the supply chain actually looks like is particularly significant. In the EU, labels are required to show where the fish was caught, its scientific species name, and the catch method. C-Choice and Oceana Canada have been calling for Canada to implement similar standards for years. So far, no comprehensive policy has been enacted. Now let's talk about a specific fish that Oceana Canada's investigators found being sold in Canadian grocery stores and restaurants under false names. And why it matters. It's called escolar. It goes by the names white tuna, butterfish, and sometimes super white tuna on menus and in stores. It has a rich, buttery texture, and it has been banned for sale in Japan since 1977. Banned in Italy. The Japanese government formally classifies it as toxic. Why? Because escolar contains a type of wax ester called gempilotoxin that the human body simply cannot digest. In some individuals, consuming even a moderate portion can cause, to put it as plainly as possible, severe and uncontrollable gastrointestinal effects, including what has been described in clinical literature as oily orange rectal discharge. It has earned the nickname among food researchers as the laxative of the sea. In Canada, escolar is not banned. The CFIA does not prohibit its sale. What it does require is that it not be mislabeled, meaning it should not be sold as white tuna or butterfish. But according to Oceana Canada's DNA testing investigation, of the samples labeled as white tuna that were tested across multiple Canadian cities, the majority turned out to be escolar. Every single sample labeled butterfish was escolar. Not most of them. Everyone. And here is the direct Walmart connection. Walmart Canada carries a high volume of imported shrimp and whitefish products through both its Great Value private label and its frozen seafood section. In a CBC Marketplace investigation, reporters purchased 51 frozen imported shrimp products from major Canadian grocery chains and sent them for independent laboratory testing. Approximately 17% tested positive for antibiotic-resistant bacteria, including strains of Staph aureus and E. coli resistant to at least one antibiotic class. 1 in 4 products marketed as organic tested positive for multi-drug resistant bacteria. The CFIA bans the use of antibiotics in Canadian shrimp farming. That ban does not apply to imports. Canada imports roughly 80% of the seafood it consumes. The CFIA's import surveillance program uses random and targeted sampling, but the fraction of total imports that are physically tested remains a fraction of what actually enters the country. And according to independent food policy researchers, Canada's traceability regulations continue to lag behind global best practices. Walmart scores at number 3 because of scale, The gaps in their sourcing accountability affect more Canadians more frequently than almost any other single retailer on this list. Next, number 2, Loblaw, Canada's largest grocery retailer. Over 2,500 locations, President's Choice, No Frills, Zehrs, Real Canadian Superstore, your independent grocer, Shoppers Drug Mart, and T&T Supermarket, the largest Asian grocery chain in Canada, known for its extensive seafood section with live tanks and fresh fish counters serving communities across the country. The 2025 SeaChoice report gave Loblaw a failing grade, and the reason that stings particularly is that Loblaw actually scored the highest of any Canadian retailer on one specific measure: coverage of indirect products like health, beauty, and pet food under its sustainability policy. They were the only retailer to achieve that. And yet, failing grade. Why? Because according to SeaChoice's assessment, Loblaw's sustainability commitments show significant gaps when it comes to coverage across all seafood sold in store, particularly through complex subsidiaries and high-volume banners like T&T Supermarket, one of the most seafood-forward chains in Canada. T&T moves serious seafood volume, including live product, serving communities that rely on it as a primary source. Yet SeaChoice's findings suggest the oversight framework that Loblaw publicly promotes does not appear to fully extend to everything on those shelves, a gap the company has not clearly addressed in its public reporting. Seafood mislabeling is also a documented national issue that affects every high-volume retailer. Multi-year investigations by Costco Canada, testing hundreds of samples across Canadian cities using DNA barcoding, found that certain species like snapper, butterfish, and yellowtail were mislabeled at staggering rates. In a national study of over 400 samples from retailers and restaurants, 44% were mislabeled overall. Montreal grocery stores and restaurants showed a 61% rate in one Oceania investigation. No retailer was implicated by name in these studies. But Loblaw's dominant market share means more Canadians are exposed to the industry-wide problem through its stores than through anyone else's. Loblaw has the resources, the supply chain infrastructure, and the leverage with suppliers to be a genuine leader here. The technology for species verification and traceability exists. According to SeaChoice, that leadership is not yet being demonstrated. And here we are, number 1, and this one is straightforwardly documented. Pattison Group, the BC-based parent company that owns Save-On-Foods, Buy Low Foods, Nestor's Market, Choices Market, and 10 other store chains, received the lowest score of any major Canadian retailer in the 2025 SeaChoice report, 14%, and it wasn't close. According to SeaChoice's findings, Pattison Group was the only major Canadian retailer with no public human rights policy at all. The only one that doesn't publish its supplier code of conduct. And its sustainable seafood policy? According to the report, it appears to apply only to Save-On-Foods, leaving the other 12 store chains under its ownership operating without the same framework. There's also a traceability problem that has now been documented over multiple years. SeaChoice has assessed Pattison Group annually since 2018. Every year, the company has reported that it is working on achieving full chain traceability. As of the 2025 report, SeaChoice noted that no tangible process has been reported. That's 7 years of working on it. To Pattison Group's credit, Save-On-Foods did push back on the methodology, noting that as a private company, it is not in a position to disclose sales and volume data that SeaChoice's 2025 scoring required. The company also stated that 74% of its unbranded and private label, fresh and frozen seafood at Save-On-Foods was OceanWise recommended in 2024, a real milestone that deserves acknowledgement. But OceanWise covers the environmental dimension. It doesn't address the human rights question, the traceability gap, or the 12 other store chains that sit outside the policy entirely. If you're in Western Canada, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and your regular store is a Save-On-Foods or a Buy Low Foods, this is information you deserve to have. So, 5 stores, documented failures, now what? Here's the thing. The problem isn't that these stores are uniquely terrible, The problem is that Canada's seafood system has real transparency gaps, and these stores together control the majority of where Canadians buy fish. That makes their failures a public issue, not just a corporate one. But you're not helpless. Here's what you can do right now. First, use your nose. Fresh fish should smell like the ocean, clean, light, briny. If it smells fishy, sour, or like ammonia, walk away. This works no matter where you shop. Second, ask the staff directly. Where was this caught? Was it previously frozen? What country did it come from? If they don't know or can't find out, that's your signal about how much priority that store gives to seafood knowledge. Third, be skeptical of generic label language. Responsibly farmed, sustainably sourced. These phrases are not regulated in Canada. They can appear on a label without independent verification. Look for specific certifications like Marine Stewardship Council or Aquaculture Stewardship Council, and understand that even those have limitations. Fourth, consider where you buy. Local fish markets with dedicated fishmongers typically offer more knowledge and fresher product. Community-supported fishery programs connect you directly with local fishing operations. Frozen at sea products from reputable brands can genuinely be fresher than fresh fish that's been sitting in a display case for days. And fifth, support better rules. Canada lags behind the EU on seafood traceability requirements. The EU's rigorous traceability and labeling laws, requiring scientific species names, catch areas, and production methods, are widely considered a higher standard than what Canada currently mandates, and stronger traceability rules reduce the opportunities for fraud to go undetected. Oceana Canada, Sea Choice, and other organizations are pushing for similar changes here. If this matters to you, let your MP know. The 5 stores we covered today, Costco, Sobeys, Walmart Canada, Loblaw, and Pattison Group, together represent the vast majority of Canadian seafood sales. Their policies, their gaps, and their silences affect what ends up on millions of Canadian tables every week. You now know what the watchdogs found, you know the questions to ask, and you know where to push for better. That's not a small thing. If this investigation was useful, subscribe to North America Crisis Radar. We're here to make sure Canadians have the information the industry would rather you didn't have. Drop a comment below. Did any of this surprise you? We read everyone.